And I also wanted that to be an example to my kids, that they knew the real mum, not the one that was pleasing everyone or doing the right thing or keeping within the cultural boundaries or whatever. But if I'm going to give them a legacy, the legacy should be me, Mary, and who I am, the real Mary that may say things that embarrass them sometimes or challenge them or whatever. But at least when I'm there on my deathbed, they'll be grieving the real Mary, not a pseudo Mary, because ultimately that's my legacy.
What's the real Mary?
Goodness knows, someone who wants to challenge, wants to find out, but more than that, I sometimes say I'm like a cosmic Agatha Christie. I want to know who did it, when, and how. And I'm still, trying to join the dots, and the dots may completely, cover the universe, but at least I'm going to die knowing I did my best to find out whatever the truth was. And I probably still won't know, but at least I'll have fun trying.
And welcome to another installment of Behind Greatness by Inspire. It is Luciano here speaking. Before we get into it here with Mary, our new guest today, I want to implore the listener, new or a regular listener, please subscribe, please rate when you get a chance, and share with family and friends. And then the last question or last request or suggestion, let's make it a suggestion. If you are feeling like you want to support us, we are a not-for-profit and a registered charity. Just go online. Our website is behindgreatness.org, as you know, and you can see where you can do that. And while you're there, you might as well check out our library of content, our library of conversations that we've been having over the last few years with people all over the world. And speaking about all over the world, today's guest, is that a good segue? Is that a good segue, Mary?
That's great.
Thank you. Thank you. This is exactly on the other side of the world where Mary is. So Mary is in Australia, Melbourne, right? Near Melbourne?
No, near Brisbane. Queensland.
Yeah, Queensland. Okay. I'm sorry. Yes, I knew Queensland. So before we get into a little bit of your bio, Mary, I want to tell the listeners, so our regular listeners are an open-minded bunch. And I think what's happening is that our regular listeners have come on this journey with us. And as we've been on this journey for the last 3 years, we have been opening up our minds and we've been expanding our minds. The more and more we have conversations with people who've pushed the barrier, and continue to push the barrier and explore. So scientists and artists and philosophers and everybody in between, our listeners, I think are appreciating the same and are learning with us. So this is a request to our new listeners: stay open-minded. And with this conversation, it's going to challenge you to be and stay open-minded, which is going to be fun. It's going to be fun. So to Mary, because this is about Mary. Mary Rodwell is the founder and principal of Australian Close Encounter Resource Network, ACERN. That's the way to pronounce it, just like the word. Okay. She's a former nurse, a midwife, and health educator, and was employed as a professional counselor for the National Health Service UK and Australian counselling agencies, Silver Chain and Centre Care. ACERN's primary role is to offer professional counseling, support, hypnotherapy, and information to individuals and their families with anomalous paranormal experiences, particularly, specializing in abduction contact experiences. Mary is recognized internationally as one of Australia's leading researchers in the UFO and Contact phenomenon. She is the author of Awakening: How Extraterrestrial Contact Can Transform Your Life from 2002, and The New Human: Awakening to Our Cosmic Heritage from 2016. She has lectured all over the world, and it seems like on every continent, and has been in international news media and news programs and documentaries that we will post up also in the show notes. And I want to finish off as part of her bio, which is how we found out about Mary, that she was a founding member of FREE, that was co-founded by Rey Hernandez with the leadership of Dr. Edgar Mitchell. And he was the astronaut, as our regular listeners know, that we've been talking about for the last few months. FREE is the foundation. FREE stands for, and it's now changed names, but stands for Foundation for Research into Extra-Terrestrial Encounters. She is also on the advisory committee and member of Exopolitics, and the organizer for the first international conference, Hidden Truths, in Perth, Western Australia. Welcome to the program, Mary.
Thank you, Lisano. It's a pleasure.
And actually, just want to do a quick shout out to our editor, podcast editor, Chris Mottram, who's been with us from the beginning. He's awesome, and he also resides in Perth, Australia.
Oh, okay.
Okay, Mary. There is a lot to cover. We learned first from you, as I kind of indicated earlier, about you, excuse me, through Diana Pasulka and her book. So I urge the listener to check out that episode with Diana Pasulka. And she mentioned you. I said, wow, who is Mary Rodwell? So I went into a deep search, and I figured out that I want to speak to you. And so here we are. Question to you. Enough about me here now. For serious, we're going to you. What is our cosmic heritage? What is meant by that?
Oh gosh, I'll try and encapsulate it in the way that I try to do for the media. I believe our cosmic heritage is more than what we are ever educated to believe on this planet, for sure. I believe we are a connection. We have a connection to other intelligences in the cosmos. And for me, it's about reconnecting to those intelligences in the cosmos, because I believe they've been interacting with us ever since Homo sapiens sapiens appeared on the scene, perhaps even before that, because although Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal man were already there and others, there was this huge missing link. And then we found Homo sapiens sapiens turned up with twice the brain size and 223 genes that were a sideways insertion of genetic material. How that happened, I believe, from my research, is because these star nations or star beings or intelligences from other places in the cosmos decided to upgrade what I would call the indigenous species on this planet in overview. So that's why I'm saying that it's a cosmic heritage rather than just an indigenous one to planet Earth.
That is a lot to digest for someone who's never heard that type of language. So I sympathize with my former self, who would just have his head spin and probably turn and walk away in the other direction. But that's not what we're doing here. So maybe it's best to give a little bit of background so we know, so the listener can understand more about how you got to where you are speaking this way and what your experiences are. You know what? Screw that for now, because I have another question.
Well, we get into the DNA, and that's something I've looked into quite deeply, but not everyone is so focused on the DNA part of it. But for me, it's the baseline for everything that my clients have been telling me over nearly 30 years, is that the DNA is crucial to understanding this whole phenomena. So it's a tangible side of this before we get into the multidimensional and the less tangible. Okay, so let's talk about your clientele. So who do you service and how? What is the story there? So give us a picture right now, or maybe right now and over the last 30 years, as you mentioned. Well, initially I thought this was a very rare experience, and I soon got disillusioned with that theory, because I was finding too many people were having experiences, even in my region, as it were, which was when I was living in Western Australia. What I've discovered over the last 30 years, that this is global. Not only global, it covers all cultures, all belief systems. You don't have to believe in extraterrestrials or aliens to have the experience. But how you interpret it will depend on your culture and your belief system. So what I'm saying is, it doesn't matter what profession you are. It doesn't matter how academic you are or how uneducated you are. It really doesn't. It crosses all boundaries, all barriers, all cultures, all religions, all beliefs. But what it will mean is that depending on the culture and the belief system will depend on how you interpret your experiences.
Right. So I I had a discussion with a close friend of mine who's actually also on the podcast, close friend of mine. Let's call him Enrico. And we were, I was talking to him, or I was relating a story, a near-death experience that I had recently listened to that was so compelling and so vivid. And I just wanted to share it with him. So I shared it with him, and then we discussed it for about 10, 15 minutes. And then I said to him, so I didn't quite understand exactly what I was thinking, but I'm saying this now because you're talking about interpretation based on cultural beliefs, right? I said, you know what? This person thought that they were saved by Jesus because they called upon Jesus to save them. And he was an atheist and he had this near-death experience, and it was actually a negative one. And I just said to him, how about if he had a belief that peanut butter jelly sandwiches could save your life? I mean, that's what would probably appear. So we talked about peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, like being a savior, because culturally speaking, that could be a possibility. So then we thought, well, then what is a near-death experience? What is it? What are you in when you are experiencing that? Anyway, so I just thought I'd throw that out to you. Actually, I don't know why I threw that out to you, but there you go.
Yeah, but it is about belief, ultimately. For example, if someone is seeing a being, for example, who is very religious and it's full of light and it feels very loving, they will say, well, I saw an angel, very possibly, or Jesus and Mary, if you're religious. But someone who doesn't have a belief in that may say, I saw a light being or an energy being. Very likely they're the same thing. It's just that, again, it is going to be tailored to our beliefs. And what's so interesting about breaking down barriers of beliefs is we're more likely to see things in their true nature, perhaps, than if we're looking at through the lens of a particular belief system or educational system or whatever.
You were Catholic. You were practicing Catholic until you had 4 kids. Is that right? Remember that? Please
I've got 3 children. Yes. And I was brought up with Catholicism, and right up to my late 30s, I was still in that belief system, if you like.
What had you break away from that, if I can use that term?
A number of things.
Okay.
Primarily because I'm interested in the weird and the wonderful, and have always researched the weird and the wonderful. I used to say that if it's weird and wonderful, I've got a book on it somewhere, because that's what drew me. Anything that got me thinking outside the box, I found fascinating. I wanted to understand. And there were things within my belief system and religion that didn't quite gel. And we're told we can't pick and choose, that this is what we should believe, whether you like it or not. Well, certain things didn't for me, and I even had a problem with Adam and Eve, because I didn't think it was fair that we were punished just because Eve was naughty and ate the apple. Even as a kid, I thought that was most unfair, I think, why am I blamed for that?
Well,
that is
the same story. The same story tells you that Eve was more curious.
Well, exactly. But when I started, the one thing that did come to me very clearly was about the reincarnation side of things, because I was reading books on reincarnation and it sounded very, very plausible, and it made a lot more sense than having one life and then being, either going to heaven or hell, or purgatory. Of course, most of us were going to end up in purgatory or whatever. And I thought, we just get a handle on what life is about, and then we're dead. What's the purpose of all of that? It didn't make any sense. So I'm a very actually logical kind of person, Things have to make sense. They have to stack up. And it didn't stack up and didn't make any sense to me, whereas reincarnation did. it was, yes, over lifetimes, we're learning and we're growing and we're becoming more aware of who and what we are and what's important, and all those important qualities about love and compassion and whatever that we learn. And also because I went through a regression myself, out of curiosity, and discovered that I'd, out of the, in total openness, found myself revisiting 3 lives and curious about how could I tap into that. So for me, it wasn't just about exploring it academically or intellectually. I wanted to experience it as well, because I was a bit fed up of being told what to believe and how to understand things. To me, in the end, it's the human experience that tells you the truth more than anything else. And that was what really was my baseline.
Okay, you said a few things there. Use also the word disillusioned. Use reincarnation, and then the human experience. So let's take disillusion for a second. We had Gabor Mate on the show, and he's right now a very prominent ND who wrote a book just recently, one of 10 books or whatever. And he's been on a junket of interviews globally. But we talked about disillusionment, and that's what really caught our ear in that conversation. Because when somebody says, "Oh, I was so disillusioned," it's a congratulatory situation when somebody's disillusioned, because it means that they've broken out of whatever illusion they were thinking they were living in.
Absolutely.
So the reason I also say this is because I like to learn other people's pivotal stories of disillusionment. I think that's what it is. Because I went through 1 or 2 of my own, but very small in terms of breaking through any barriers. So this is also why we had you on here. The second thing was the human experience, if you don't mind, Mary. We also just had John B. Alexander on the program, and he's also said something that was very key. He says, just because you don't understand something, it doesn't mean you need to ignore it. And the human experience is a collection of many experiences that all of us individually may not understand and have potentially, most likely, ignored. And we dismiss it to live our lives because we have work to do. We have jobs we need to attend to. We have families we need to attend to. And so it becomes less important. But all of us have a story or 2 or 5 or 15 of things that have happened to us that we could not explain and have chosen to ignore rather than explore openly and share with people, because maybe it brings embarrassment, maybe it brings shame, maybe it brings more confusion and we're uncomfortable with it. What do you say to that?
I think that is absolutely correct. And what's interesting for me is the number of people that are in their 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s that had things going on all their lives, which have been unusual or anomalous or strange or weird or they would see as supernatural, but never quite got to a point where they said, I've got to look into this. They will conveniently forget it or just put it to one side. I'll look at that at another time. And it may be a host of reasons why that is, or it may be because it brings up fear. Fear of not knowing what that really means. And if I go there, maybe I'm going to, it's going to overtake me. So there'll be a lot of different reasons, but there seems to come to a point where there's part of them saying, I want to know now. I want to understand. I want to know how I had this journey and lost 3 hours of time. What happened there after I saw those lights or whatever? And it will be nagging at them to a point where they say, do you know what? Now I've got to look at this. And that might be when they're, as I say, 60 or 70 or even 80.
You told me a story, a small one, when you were 3. And you said at 3 years of age, You looked out the window and it was quiet, and you said, quote unquote, "I wonder if things only move if I looked at them." And I didn't tell you when you told me this. When I was really young, so I don't know if it was 3, but I remember being really, really small, 4 or 5, and staring at things in the sky and thinking the opposite, that I wonder if things only moved because I looked at them. And if I looked away, did they stand still? I mean, it's the same sort of spirit. But it reminded me, like you telling me that when you were 3 reminded me that maybe we should recall that simple curiosity that we had when we were children and apply that to experiences that maybe we don't understand now. Because I think that kind of curiosity, that pure, simple curiosity, is something that maybe could, I mean, you said fear, have the fear overtake you. That could be a good weapon against any fear we might have, including disillusionment.
Yeah, I've always felt that the fear is something to challenge, because, life is about a challenge. Life is about experience. And every time we run away from that, we close the door more and more onto in ourselves to understanding anything. Because in the end, we just end up in this box of fear, afraid to go out the door. We get a truth agoraphobia, really.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll tell you why it was more important than anything was when I was working with people who were dying. They may have only have a few more weeks to live. I worked for hospice and grief and bereavement. And the one thing they said to me was this, that they had regrets, that they hadn't done certain things or they hadn't said certain things or whatever. And I made a personal vow to myself that from then on, I would challenge everything and I would live everything that I could live, because ultimately, how many lives I've got, that's why I was here. I was here to experience, to grow, to challenge. And I also wanted that to be an example to my kids, that they knew the real mum, not the one that was pleasing everyone or doing the right thing or keeping within the cultural boundaries or whatever. But if I'm going to give them a legacy, the legacy should be me, Mary, and who I am, the real Mary that may say things that embarrass them sometimes or challenge them or whatever. But at least when I'm there on my deathbed, they'll be grieving the real Mary, not a pseudo Mary, because ultimately that's my legacy.
What's the real Mary?
Goodness knows, someone who wants to challenge, wants to find out, but more than that, I sometimes say I'm like a cosmic Agatha Christie. I want to know who did it, when, and how. And I'm still, trying to join the dots, and the dots may completely, cover the universe. But at least I'm going to die knowing I did my best to find out whatever the truth was. And I probably still won't know, but at least I'll have fun trying.
I'm glad you talked about your palliative care experience or the epiphany that you had, because I wrote this just so that you can see. I actually wrote it. I don't know if you can see that.
Oh, yes.
Okay. So I wrote that because I don't have any experience in palliative care other than when my mother spent 3 weeks there before she passed. And parts of my real mother started to come out with one-on-one conversations. And her wisdom, I really miss. There is so much wisdom in all of us that when laid bare bones, it's apparent that we've been living partial lives. Anyway, so thank you for sharing that. You said, though, in the same interview that I listened to a few days ago, where you mentioned palliative as well, you said we are actually. Well, I'll give the whole quote, that we are from the beginning, we're little, programmed with believing that we know very little, and that people who have paper documenting their education are smarter and more knowledgeable. And you said that's rubbish. You are both the student and the guru. Elaborate, please.
Well, when you've worked with people, hundreds of people that you've taken to other lives, they'll go back in their own genetic history and recall certain lives. One of the things that I will do with them when they experience that life is take them through the death sequence. So they'll see their body and they'll see their essence, their soul self, leave the body and move into another frequency, another state of awareness, where they'll be aware of their life and they'll be aware that they've also transcended that into a new kind of consciousness. And one of the things I'll ask them is this: what is it that you learned in that life? And they will say, well, I learned about compassion, or I learned about limits, or I learned about some other experience. And they'll say, oh, I didn't do so well with this, this, and this. They'll also talk about joining their soul family, but also about coming again to another life experience. They will choose their parents, they will choose their siblings, and they will explain why they've chosen certain individuals. So my point with all of this is that as a soul, I believe we have experienced many, many, many different lifetimes in various forms, from light to whatever form you know that you can think of, really. But what we are is a combination of that understanding, that awareness, that wisdom, that knowing that we're bringing with us to each lifetime. And when we talk about our inner wisdom or our higher self or super conscious or whatever it is, what we're tapping into is that awareness, that wisdom, that knowledge that we have through eons of soul experiences that we can tap into, and is there actually guiding us when we listen. You know, that resonance that we have, that knowing, that sensing, that feeling that we have, where you just have this, I just know it. And of course you do, because you're your own teacher. But we have been educated to believe that the only people that we can trust are those outside of ourselves with the pieces of paper or certain status, and that we are nothing. I mean, good old Catholics, we're all taught we're sinners, aren't we? So it's a good baseline, isn't it?
We're born with
it. So we're really no good at anything, really, because we're all sinners and we're on a loser before we start. So, yeah.
Well, the anecdote there, I think what I'm hearing and what I'm trying to put together is we need to listen to children, and we need to listen to what mothers are saying. We hear often in our culture, it's a mother's intuition or a woman's intuition, and it's bullshit. It's bullshit. And I say it's bullshit because we categorize it as something that's unattainable if you're not a woman or not a mother. However, I mean, I'm married to a woman and a mother, so I see it. I mean, I saw it in my own mother. There is an intuition there that I could never explain, where she has a feeling that somebody is not doing well, somebody is not going to be safe. There is something there that she is tapping into without understanding she's tapping into. How about if we just become curious about what I say she in this case, is tapping into, to see if that maybe is a human thing and it's not somebody else's intuition. Maybe it's a human intuition that women might be closer to, or mothers might be closer to, but maybe that's something it's there in front of us that we choose to ignore.
I think everyone has intuition, but depending on our sex, to a certain extent, it's harder, I think, for someone of the male gender to tap into that, because they are sometimes not given the credence that they can access all of this in the same way a woman can access her intuition. Everyone is born with it. I believe absolutely. Everyone can tap into their intuition, to their knowing, their sensing, and the multidimensional realm. The problem is, even with genders we have, a woman is allowed to get away with it. She's allowed to be a bit weird because she's female, whereas the guy can't because he'll lose credibility or whatever. So there's all these cultural limits that create, if you like, these program blocks to who we really are and our access to that. And I say to people, your knowing, your sensing, your feeling is multidimensional information. It's telling you stuff. Are you going to listen to it?
So I say this as a man and as a working man in Western culture, somebody working in business. When I have these kinds of conversations with people in the context of work or business, I have to be very careful, because flaky and weird are words that we use, men use often, right? To describe other men that they don't that they get weirded out by. But I'll give you a quick example this morning. I'm so glad we're talking right now. So glad. Just this morning, this is a colleague of mine, used to be a client of mine, or of ours, same age. We kind of gotten along. I wouldn't say we're friends, but we're friendly towards each other. And we meet up every once in a while. And we had a video call. We hadn't seen each other in over a year. But we were talking about work. And then he asked me a question. And I answered the question. This is like a non-work thing. And then I threw in a hint of what I was exploring. And I could see he was interested. So then I brought him with me. I brought him with me on, quote unquote, a weird journey of experiences and of learning, right? And he was fascinated. And what did he say to me? This is on a business call. He goes, "This is so fascinating. We got to get together." And this is not anything unique. It's not anything unique. But if I started with that, I would have weirded him out.
Yeah.
But it's there. It's there.
Yeah.
It's there with most people, I think.
Yes, it absolutely is.
This brings me to, I'm sorry, I keep giving these examples, but you are giving me the meat here to chew on. This is great. You mentioned a word, confusion. When you were in your sessions with your clients, and you were doing past life regression or channeling and so forth, I'm sure people are confused when this happens, especially for the first time. What do you say to confusion or about confusion?
Well, let's put it in a different context, in the sense that when people contact me, sometimes it takes a great deal of courage to do so, because they're putting themselves on the line to tell me things that they have been judged for previously, in most cases, as being somewhat off the planet, crazy, lost the plot. I could give you a whole range. Get real. All right, there's some of the things they may have, experienced time and time again when they've tried to talk about things that have puzzled them, whether it's an experience of an out-of-body experience or whether or not they've had some other experience with, extraterrestrials, non-human intelligence, whatever, angels, fairies, whatever it is. And they're waiting for me, and they'll say, I hope you're not going to think I'm crazy. Okay. So they're coming in very wary of what they're going to tell me. My job is to give them, a safe place to know it's safe to say whatever they need to say. And I will use the language. You can go to parallel universes, different timelines. You can go to other planets, whatever it is that's coming up, you're welcome to do so. In other words, I'm saying to them, there is nothing that's going to particularly surprise me, although it sometimes does. But I am open to however it is they experience they have understood their experience, with absolutely zero judgment on that. And the relief to know that they can say what's probably something they've been going over maybe many, many years, 10, 20, 30 years sometimes, to be finally able to say it. And one of the biggest things, if I did nothing at all but listen, they'll say as they're going out the door, a huge weight has been lifted off my shoulders because somebody has listened and hasn't judged their experience.
Yeah. You know, I don't bemoan living right now in this lifetime in a Western culture. So what I'm going to say is not going to be a strike against, but living where we are living right now and having this conversation would be silly to someone who has lived an indigenous way of life. And
exactly.
I mean, we're not talking about just the indigenous now. So in North America, Latin America, Australia, New Zealand, Africa, Central Asia, we're talking from the beginning of time. Because this is just a part of the reality of living, the material and the non-material. That I've understood that there is a meaning of, a search for understanding of our non-material selves in a indigeneity. Period. So the crazy's got nothing to do with it. That's been imposed upon us by our culture.
Yeah.
I know this is common. This is old hat for you, but just saying this right now is just expressing this right now with you here in this moment in time is release right now for me. Sorry, you were about to say something.
I was going to say, I got to a point where it became so obvious to me that I believe everyone has experiences they can't explain. And I remember being asked to speak many, many years ago to, I think it was Rotary or Provost, one of those gentlemen's clubs, you know, retirees and all the rest of it, Western Australia. And I remember as I entered the hall where I was going to speak to them, it was over a dinner or something. They were having a dinner and I'd been invited as the UFO lady. And this gentleman came up to me and he said, "Oh, I'm going to have a lot of fun with you as a UFO lady, you see, and what have you." And I remember right away saying, "Well, do your damnedest." Because I was then on. And I remember thinking to myself, right, if that's the tone of the audience, which I say a lot of them were retired blokes, you know, men, I started it off with, I'd like to bet with you, every single one of you in this room has had experiences you can't explain. Not a word, not a whisper. It was total silence because I knew it was true.
Yeah.
Because it is. We are not just a physical body. We are all multidimensional. Of course, they're going to have experiences they can't explain. The trouble is we have a model of psychology that doesn't give them any permission, or any of us permission, to experience anything other than our physical senses, which is BS, total BS.
So I'll echo these words with words that we've heard from Dr. Pim van Lommel, who's a researcher on near-death studies, also a retired cardiologist. And he said, he goes, "I'm a materialist, but I'm also a non-materialist. And science needs to catch up with the fact that subjective experience is just as important as objective."
Yeah.
Sorry.
Only there isn't objective experience, actually.
Do tell.
Is there? Well, we influence everything around us, do we not? Physics tells us that. So nothing is objective. That's a joke. Truthfully, physics tells us we affect everything around us simply by looking at it, observing it.
We create it by looking at it.
Yes, this is physics, and I'm no physicist. So what is objective? There's no such thing.
How did you end up connecting with the fifth man on the planet to walk the moon, astrophysicist, engineer, astronaut?
Oh, you mean Dr. Edgar Mitchell?
Correct.
I didn't actually personally connect with him. It was via Rey, because I'm sure Rey gave you a bit of an overview of how I ended up getting back to him after this thing popped up on my computer after 6 months, and I'm realizing I've missed this poor gentleman that has had this profound experience and all the rest of it. And as soon as we started talking, and he was explaining that he'd had this kind of download about exploring physics and what have you, and I knew Dr. Rudy Schild because I'd spent time with him and he'd become a friend and a colleague. And Rey gave me his bio, and I sent it to Rudy. And within 12 hours, he got in touch with Rey, and also then said, well, I'm connected to Dr. Edgar Mitchell. Would you like to go and see him and tell him what's going on? And basically, Dr. Mitchell actually said, we need to do something about this. And this is how the Dr. Edgar Mitchell Free Foundation was born, if you like, and lots of other weird stuff went into that, but yes. I'll keep it fairly normal. But
no, weird is good. Weird is good. Please.
Well, let's put it like this. There was a lot of intuitive information that came, even with the name, which I don't know if Rey told you how the free part of it came, but I had a quick word with my friends up there. I said, right, we need a name that's going to be catchy and whatever. And within 20 minutes, I was going through it, because Rey came out with this long, wonderfully academic kind of terminology. And I said, no, you need something that's going to, be quick and resonate. It's like ACERN. I did the same thing with ACERN, concern, ACERN, whatever. Mm-hmm. I do that kind of stuff. It works. It works. Yeah. I'd probably be good at competitions, I think, because they like you to do things like. But no, I just have a quick chat and say, right, what's going to work with this? And within 20 minutes, it came up with free. And Rey said, that'll do it. So we ended up with free.
Yeah, so he didn't tell me that.
He's trying. Oh, look, there's been lots of. I believe there's another layer to consciousness where we're all pulling each other's strings, and we're just saying, right, we need to put this here and that needs to go there, and then we just, oh, right, that sounds like a good idea.
Well, maybe we are creating it in another dimension.
I believe we are co-creators, if you like, or maybe the creators. I suspect, and I've often wondered whether I don't know if you know with Star Trek, the holodeck, where they go in and they create various scenarios to have a play and have a drama. Yeah. Well, we may be creating the holodeck called Planet Earth, and we're putting ourselves in different situations, and we're saying, oh, this might be a good idea, or put that in. Or
okay, so two things. We'll get right back to that. So Rey Hernandez, for the listener, is not yet on the podcast, but we are going to be recording with him soon. So they'll get to listen to his story and then connect the dots as well with what we're talking about here. And you mentioned Dr. Rudy Schild, who's a friend of yours. And he was also an He's an
astrophysicist. Yes. Harvard University.
Harvard. Yeah, I was going to say Yale. Okay, Harvard. Good. Thank you. But I want to get back to him in just a moment too. But let's go back to the holodeck, because you mentioned, and for the listeners who are not watching the video, you pointed up, and you referred to your friends up there. Briefly, tell us, who are your friends up there? Who do you communicate with, or what do you communicate with? What is it? What's your experience?
Well, they're not necessarily up there. They're around us all the time, just different frequencies. Okay, I call them my non-human team, although there are those that have been human, and there are those that maybe haven't been human, and some of them are physical from this density, but there's others that are from other densities, like interdimensional, extra-dimensional, transdimensional, even I believe some that come from what we term our future, although we've understood that time isn't linear as we're told it is, that everything actually is now. So if you can get your head around that, I sort of see it all like this, that we access other lives through this kind of understanding that it's not like this, but it's all now. So that's why we can access other lifetimes. and other experiences and how they impact on us with certain phobias. For example, I've taken people who've had a phobia of something. It might be water, for example, and we've wanted to know where the origin of that fear was, or that phobia. And it may take them into another life, not this one. It may take them into medieval times where they're on a ship and the ship was shipwrecked, or that, and that was where it came from. You can actually help them pass that fear through remembering it. When they revisit it, often that can actually heal that imprint, as I call it, and they can lose the phobia. So if somebody wants to think that's a whole load of, oh, that's just their fantasy, it's interesting that somehow that fantasy cures them of the phobia by merely revisiting it. Sure. So that's my answer to that one.
For me, that is an indication. So I'm thinking philosophically here, maybe. Maybe it isn't. I don't know. I'm not a philosopher, so I'm just saying, I'm using the word maybe loosely. That the human body, our bodies, are too opaque. They forget. At the cellular level, we don't, but maybe our brains forget. Our brains cannot access everything that exists. So we rely on survival mode, and so our five senses are our guides, and thereby maybe we don't forget. Maybe it's there. We just don't remember that it's there.
Yeah,
I guess that's forgetting.
This I wrote down the other day because I'm always looking into DNA. And I just want people to understand this. The latest information I've got about DNA, in 1 gram of DNA contains 700 terabytes of data. And this particular researcher said that their ebook could go onto this 1 gram of DNA 70 billion times.
Wow.
So 13.5 billion years of data in 1 gram of DNA. So what does that suggest?
It suggests we know nothing.
But it does say how we can access information that we have not consciously learned. That with the right intent, which is a frequency, which when we put out a frequency, we're curious about something, what happens? Things start to come to us because we're putting out the frequency for that intent and then it comes and how interesting. I always noticed when you're pregnant, you suddenly notice how many other people are pregnant.
Yes.
What are you doing? We're putting out a frequency on that. That's how we draw the information to us. When we start getting involved in something, we are putting out, I'm interested in that multidimensionally. The frequency is out there for data. What happens? We start to find ourselves being drawn to certain books, drawn to certain information. We call it synchronicities, or we call it coincidence. No, we're doing it.
Yeah, we're just being open the way we need to be.
Yeah. We become an open radar for that particular data or the information. We're tapping into that 700 terabytes.
So I tried to make sense of your discussions on DNA, because in your book you do discuss DNA rupture, DNA not rupture. What was the word? When something goes awry. It'll come to me.
Okay.
But there is reference. You've referenced Rudy Schild. So let's go back to Rudy for a second. So I got curious about Rudy Schild, and there are some, not a lot. He's very low key, but I understood very quickly how well respected he is in the circles as an astrophysicist. And he talks as well publicly about non-human intelligences probably reading our minds. And he uses the word cosmic as well, cosmic intelligence.
Yeah.
And the probability of the cosmic intelligence that we just right now as human beings, we can't access because we're just not open to accessing it, but it doesn't mean it's not there. So I understand why you two are friends.
He's a beautiful soul. And what blew me away was his open-mindedness to all of this and his acceptance of it as well. But there've been a number, and there's also a genius young man of 13 that's talked about the same thing, about what is God as such. This 7-year-old that I was referencing was saying that these non-human intelligences were showing them how they understood the source, the cosmic intelligence. And he said it's like an ultraviolet light that creates, which is everywhere but nowhere. And we are part of that. We are aspects of that. And I've had other children that have said similar things, that it is it's an intelligence that we're all part of, rather than a particular form that we, as humans, we've got to have something that we can understand and whatever. But it's an intelligence that creates. And this 13-year-old, another genius, was saying a similar thing. So it's interesting, isn't it? That if we can understand that, it actually makes, to me anyway, a lot more sense to have this kind of intelligence that we're all part of, this consciousness that we're actually all part of. And that's what connects us.
Let me couple that with a story that we heard on the podcast with a drummer. So he was the former and original drummer of a rock band out of Canada that got a lot of success, especially in the States. Our Lady Peace. His name is Jeremy Taggart. And he joined this rock band at 17 years old. And he was opening up for Van Halen. I mean, that's how big they got immediately in the 1990s. So I asked him, because I like to ask musicians if I find them in the mood, I asked him if he ever had an out-of-body experience while playing the drums. And he said, well, yes. And he told the story. I'll say briefly here because the listener can go to Jeremy Taggart. But he was rehearsing away on the drums north of Toronto in a place called Muskoka. And he says, I was playing away and I just found myself on the ceiling, watching my body playing the drums and seeing beings that, the way he said it, that don't exist, seeing non-physical beings in the room. So it spooked him out. And he popped right back into his body and he kept seeing these beings. And so he gives the story of a specific making eye contact with a non-material being in that room. And the story behind it was wonderful. I mean, I have goosebumps right now just relating it. But it seemed like, I suggested to him, it seemed like it opened a portal for him. It scared him, but it opened a portal from then on, that he was able to see things that were non-material. And that was just playing. And so, the reason why I mentioned that is because he said when he was playing the drums, he said, when you're in the flow of playing the drums, things just happen. They come to you. And while you're in the action, you are literally, you are able to figure things out because they're being thrown at you. You're no longer in the action. You are part of something bigger. I envy artists who are deep into their work and have that kind of experience, because it seems like that's a more natural experience than the blocked one that we have with our five senses.
And that's the difference between our 3D self and our multidimensional self. Because when somebody wants to tap more into their multidimensional self, and whoever it is that they see as their source of information, whether it's they see it as their superconscious higher self, or they see it as other intelligences that support them. With left brain, you think before you speak. Right brain, you speak before you think. It is the absolute reverse.
Because what's pushing the speaking is not the thinking.
That's exactly right. Then you know that you're tapping into that other source, whatever name you want to give that. And some feel presences so that they are recognizing the presence is giving them the information or whatever. And that's all it is. And we can all do that. This is not special people that can do it. I show people how to do this all the time. And from all different professions, I might add, they might be an MD, or they might be a lawyer, or they might be,
yeah, you're telling me
somebody who has a farm or whatever. We all have this ability. It's just that we have been taught not to trust it because you haven't logically worked it out, have you? You haven't used your analysis and your what are we taught in higher education? That's the only real stuff. No. Where do you think Einstein and Tesla and all of those, where do you think they got it when they went into a meditative state?
Yep.
Which allowed them then to access the information that they need. Look at all the inventors. It just comes to me, they'll say, or it came to me in dreams or whatever. What is that? It's when your left brain doesn't get in the way.
Yeah. This again, not to go back to kids again, but we've all been there because we've all been children. We all think it's so precious when a child says something, blurts something out that kind of makes sense and it's funny and it's truthful, but an adult would never say it. It's because they don't have that veil. They don't think before they say. They say because they're, for the same reason here, they're accessing something beyond just rationality. We've all done it.
That's right. And sometimes, we find ourselves saying something that's very, very profound. And we think, oh my goodness, where did that come from? Well, it came from that other source. That's the source of it. And however you interpret that, some will say, Jesus said it to me, or the Virgin Mary, or an angel, or whatever. But if you're,
or the sky gods. Yeah.
Yeah, whatever. But it's accurate and it resonates and it makes sense.
Father Nathan Castle, who was also on this podcast, who is a channeler, bona fide channeler. I mean, he said it pretty succinctly. He's a guy from Texas, doesn't mince words. He goes, people forget Jesus was an extraterrestrial.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's perspective.
Yeah. Well, why do I have a UFO on top of my Christmas tree? For the same reason, because I believe that was the Star of Bethlehem. That was UFO up there. That's what it was.
I implore people here to listen to Diana Pasulka, because that is exactly what she was researching and knocked into something that showed her that people were writing about this hundreds of years ago, up to 1,000 years ago in her research. And she said, wow, this is no coincidence. I'm going to look into this. Yeah. And that's how I found out about you. Mary, this has been lovely so far. I think, if you're open to it, I'd like to have another separate recording where we can talk about other things too, because there's lots.
Yeah. Okay.
But I promised you about an hour. So I want to stick to that. But I do have one last question for now. For now.
Okay.
What does greatness mean to you?
I think we're all great. We're great for incarnating onto this planet. We're great for experiencing all of whatever it is we've experienced, no matter what that is. I think it takes greatness to incarnate, to be honest, and experience. But we can be even greater if we're true to ourselves and we own who we are and we don't pretend. And we be real to each other, because ultimately that's the real greatness, is when we honor ourselves and who we are.
I love it. Own who we are. I think that's where we started from. Owning who we were. Maybe that was kicked out of us. Thank you, Mary. Thank you. It's been so lovely. We're going to have you back on, and you don't have a choice.
Okay. It's been a pleasure, Sana, and you asked some wonderful questions and you get me thinking, which I love.
Excellent. Right back at you. Thank you, Mary.
You're welcome.
Hey, it's Enrico Colantoni here, actor, director, and dedicated napper. Like what you heard today, there's more to come. Make sure to subscribe to Behind Greatness and learn about our live events at inspirenorth.com. You'll also find links to our social media right on our website, so be sure to give us a like and follow. Until next time, stay inspired.